The great crystal dome of Zephyria stretched high above the assembled delegates, its surface catching the light of 3 suns and throwing rainbow patterns across the chamber floor. Jake Morrison adjusted his collar nervously as he looked around at the hundreds of alien beings that filled the Galactic Council chambers. Some had tentacles that moved like snakes. Others had multiple eyes that blinked in patterns he could not understand. A few looked almost human, except for their blue skin or extra arms. Dr. Lisa Hamilton sat beside him, her hands shaking slightly as she held the folder containing Earth's membership application. She had spent years preparing for this moment, learning alien languages and customs, but nothing could have prepared her for the sheer scale of what surrounded them. Captain Ben Rodriguez remained calm, his military training keeping his face blank even as creatures that defied imagination moved past their seats. The chamber fell silent as a figure rose from the center ring. Elder Vorthak of the Seraphim was ancient beyond human understanding, his body made of what looked like living starlight that shifted and moved with each breath. When he spoke, his voice seemed to come from everywhere at once, echoing off the crystal walls and vibrating through the floor. "I have seen the end of all things," Vorthak said, his form growing brighter. "In my visions, I have watched civilizations burn and stars go dark. I have seen the great silence that will consume our galaxy, and I know what brings it." The other delegates began to murmur among themselves. Ambassador Krelter of the Dominion, a massive creature with 4 arms and skin like black metal, leaned forward in his seat. His species had conquered half their sector of space and feared nothing. "The humans," Vorthak continued, pointing one glowing finger toward the Earth delegation, "these small beings from the blue world will bring about the darkness that swallows all light. They may seem weak now, but they carry within them the seeds of our destruction." The chamber erupted in laughter. Krelter slammed all 4 of his fists on the table, creating a sound like thunder. "These tiny creatures? They have barely left their own star system. My people conquered 1,000 worlds while they were still throwing rocks at each other." Council President Zixandra raised her tentacles for silence. Her species had been part of the Council for 50,000 years, and she had seen many strange predictions come and go. "Elder Vorthak, your people have given us many warnings over the millennia. Some have proven true, others have not. What makes you so certain about these humans?" Vorthak's light grew dimmer, sadder. "I have seen it in the sacred flames of prophecy. The humans do not fight like other species. They do not follow the rules of war that all civilized beings understand. When cornered, they become something else entirely, something that cannot be predicted or controlled." Trade Minister Kelenos of the Hegemony, whose species controlled most of the galaxy's commerce, stood up with a sneer on his reptilian face. "Have you seen their ships? Their weapons? I have trade reports from their system. They use chemical rockets and metal bullets. My children play with more advanced toys." More laughter filled the chamber. Even some of the smaller species that usually remained quiet began to whisper jokes about the primitive humans. Jake Morrison felt his face burn with embarrassment, but he forced himself to remain silent. This was too important to let pride interfere. "Dr. Hamilton leaned over to whisper in Jake's ear. "Should we say something? Defend ourselves?" "No," Jake whispered back. "Let them underestimate us. It might work in our favor later." Elder Vorthak continued his warning, his voice growing more urgent. "You laugh because you see only what they are now, not what they will become. The humans have something that no other species possesses, the ability to change completely when survival demands it. They do not accept defeat. They do not follow the patterns that govern all other life." Supreme Commander Zektar of the Stellar Alliance, whose people had never lost a war in 3,000 years, rose to his feet. His uniform was covered in metals that caught the light like tiny stars. "Elder, with respect, the humans are barely a Type 1 civilization. They have not even mastered their own planet's energy. My fleet could conquer their entire system in a standard day." "That is exactly what makes them dangerous," Vorthak replied, but his voice was growing fainter as fewer delegates paid attention. "Every species follows the same path. They grow in power. They develop technology, they expand according to predictable patterns. Humans follow no such path. They adapt, they improvise, they survive in ways that should be impossible. President Zixandra called for order as the laughter died down. The Council will now vote on Earth's application for provisional membership. All those in favor? Hundreds of appendages rose into the air. The vote was overwhelming, minus 783 in favor, 34 against, 30 abstaining. Earth would join the Galactic Council as a junior member, with limited voting rights and trade privileges. As the session ended and delegates began to file out, many stopped by the human section to offer congratulations that felt more like condescension. "Welcome to civilization," Krelter said with what might have been a smile on his metal face. "And try not to break anything important." Elder Vorthok approached the human delegation as the chamber emptied. Up close, his starlight form was beautiful but unsettling, like looking into a living constellation. "I'm sorry for what I said about your species," he told them. "I do not wish harm upon you, but the visions do not lie." "What exactly did you see?" Dr. Hamilton asked. Her scientific curiosity overcoming her diplomatic training, Vorthok's light flickered like a candle in the wind. "I saw the sky go dark. I saw great ships falling from the stars like rain. I saw species that had ruled for millions of years reduced to nothing in days. And in the center of it all, I saw humans doing what no other species would dare, fighting. Back against the impossible." "That sounds like we saved the galaxy, not destroy it," Captain Rodriguez said. "Perhaps," Vorthok replied. "But to fight monsters, one must become something monstrous. The question is whether the galaxy will survive what humanity becomes when pushed to its limits." The old prophet drifted away, leaving the three humans alone in the vast chamber. Outside the crystal dome, alien ships moved between the stars like schools of fish, following traffic patterns established over thousands of years. Everything seemed orderly, predictable, safe. Jake Morrison looked up at those stars and wondered what Elder Vorthok had really seen in his visions. Part of him hoped they would never find out. Another part of him, the part that remembered humanity's long history of surviving the impossible, almost looked forward to proving the old prophet wrong, or proving him right in ways no one expected. 3 years had passed since Earth joined the Galactic Council, and humanity was learning that being accepted and being respected were very different things. Ambassador Carol Davis sat in the waiting room outside the Trade Commission offices. On Nexus Prime, watching alien delegates walk past her without so much as a glance. She had been waiting for 6 hours to meet with officials who could approve Earth's mining rights in the Kepler system. Lieutenant Tom Bradley, her aide, checked his watch for the 100th time. "Ma'am, maybe we should reschedule." "It's clear. They're not taking this seriously." "We wait," Carol said firmly. "Earth needs those mining rights, and I won't let them dismiss us without even a meeting." Through the transparent walls of the station, she could see the massive ships of other species docking and undocking with smooth efficiency. Dominion vessels the size of cities, hegemony trade ships that sparkled like jewels, Stellar Alliance, warships that moved with deadly grace. Beside them, the few human ships looked like toys, small, crude, and obviously primitive. Finally, Trade Minister Kelanos emerged from his office, his reptilian features showing barely concealed annoyance. "Ambassador Davis, I apologize for the delay. Please, come in." The meeting lasted exactly 12 minutes. Kelanos listened to Carol's presentation with the same expression someone might use when watching a child's drawing. When she finished explaining Earth's need for rare minerals and their willingness to pay fair market prices, he simply shook his head. "I'm afraid the Kepler system is far too dangerous for human operations," he said. "The asteroid fields require advanced navigation systems and mining equipment that your species simply does not possess. Perhaps in a few hundred years, when you've developed more sophisticated technology." "We've successfully mined asteroids in our own system," Carol pointed out. "Our engineers are confident they can adapt to different conditions." Kelanos made a sound that might have been laughter. "My dear Ambassador, there is a vast difference between scraping metals from your local rocks and operating in a system where the gravitational forces alone would tear your ships apart. No, I think it's best if we leave such work to species with proper equipment. Meanwhile, on the other side of the station, Captain Steve Parker was having his own frustrating encounter. The captain of the merchant vessel New Horizon had come to Nexus Prime hoping to establish trade routes between Earth and the outer colonies. Instead, he found himself explaining basic human physiology to skeptical alien buyers. "Your food requirements are too specific," complained broker Veltar of the collective markets. "You need oxygen in a very narrow range, water that meets exact purity standards, and temperatures that vary only slightly. Most species are far more adaptable. Trading with humans would require too many special accommodations." "We're willing to work with whatever you have available," Steve said. "Humans are actually pretty good at adapting to difficult conditions." Veltar's tentacles writhed in what Parker had learned was the equivalent of a dismissive wave. "Captain, your species has lived on exactly one world in its entire history. How can you claim to be adaptable? The hegemony colonizes worlds with methane atmospheres. The Dominion thrives in the vacuum of space itself. You humans still need to wear suits just to walk on a moon." The conversation ended with Parker leaving empty-handed, his cargo hold still full of Earth goods that no one seemed interested in buying. Dr. Amy Foster was having better luck at the scientific consortium, or so she thought. She had been invited to present her research on human genetic diversity to the galaxy's leading scientists. The data was impressive. Humans showed more genetic variation within their single species than most aliens showed across their entire evolutionary family. "Trees." "Fascinating," said Chief Researcher Naltuk of the Archivists. "Your species does show unusual diversity. However, I believe you may be misinterpreting the significance of this data." Amy frowned. "How so?" "The numbers clearly show that human genetic adaptation occurs much faster than previously thought possible. What you're seeing are simply statistical anomalies," Naltuk replied with the confidence of someone who had studied evolution for 3,000 years. "True adaptation takes millions of years. Any changes you observe in human populations over mere centuries or millennia are just random variations, not meaningful evolution." Other scientists in the room nodded in agreement. The idea that a species could change significantly in such a short time went against everything they understood about biology. Humans were just too young as a species to have developed any real adaptive advantages. Back on Earth, General Rick Collins was reading reports from these diplomatic failures with growing frustration. He sat in his office at Global Defense Command, watching news feeds from around the galaxy that painted humanity as the cosmic equivalent of newcomers who didn't understand how things worked. Colonel Nancy Price knocked on his door and entered without waiting for permission. "Sir, I have the latest reports from Project Blackout." Collins looked up from his screens. "Good news, I hope." "Better than good, sir. Our teams have successfully tested the new propulsion systems. We're getting efficiency rates that are 30% better than our previous designs." "How does that compare to alien technology?" Nancy hesitated. "Well, sir, it's still nowhere near what the Dominion or Hegemony uses. Their ships are faster, more powerful, and can operate in conditions that would destroy our vessels. But our new systems have one advantage: they're incredibly simple to manufacture and repair." Collins leaned back in his chair. "Simple might not be enough, Colonel." "Actually, sir, that's where things get interesting. I've been reviewing the technical specifications that other species filed with the Trade Commission. Their technology is impressive, but it's also incredibly complex. A single malfunction in their navigation systems can cripple an entire ship. Our systems are crude by comparison, but they're also robust." The general was quiet for a moment, thinking. "Keep working on it, Colonel. I have a feeling we're going to need every advantage we can get." On the mining world of Kepler 442b, Mayor Paul Johnson was proving that human adaptability was more than just genetic diversity. The planet had been written off by 3 different alien species as uninhabitable, too cold, too dry, and with an atmosphere that was barely breathable even with filtration systems. But the human colonists had not just survived, they had thrived. Johnson walked through the settlement's main street. watching children play in the thin air that would have left most aliens gasping. The buildings were simple, built from local materials using techniques that alien engineers called primitive but effective. Another supply ship arrived today, reported Deputy Mayor Linda Shun, joining him on his evening walk. The crew couldn't believe we're making this place work. Their scanner readings said this world should be a barren wasteland. What did you tell them? Johnson asked. The truth. That humans are stubborn. When we decide to make something work, we usually find a way. The alien crew had stayed for 3 days, studying the colony with the fascination of scientists examining an impossible specimen. They took detailed readings of everything: the air recycling systems, the water purification plants, the hydroponic farms that somehow produced food in soil that should have been sterile. When they left, their report to the Galactic Council was filed under anomalous results requiring further study. The general conclusion was that humans had gotten extremely lucky with local conditions and that their success was not repeatable, but across human space, similar stories were becoming common. Colonies that should have failed were succeeding. Ships that should have been destroyed by cosmic radiation kept flying. Trade routes that other species considered too dangerous became regular paths for human vessels. The galaxy's established powers began to notice, but they explained it away with the same dismissive attitude they had always shown toward humanity. The humans were lucky, they said. Or they were too ignorant to realize how dangerous their situations really were. Or they were exaggerating their achievements for political gain. Elder Vorthek, watching from his monastery on the Seraphim homeworld, felt the currents of fate shifting like wind before a storm. His young apprentice, Prophet Saindel, approached with news from the galaxy's communication networks. Master, the other council species are becoming annoyed with our continued warnings about the humans. Some are calling for our expulsion from the council. Vorthek's starlight form flickered with sadness. They will not listen until it is too late. The humans are already becoming what they will need to be, but no one sees it because they are looking for the wrong signs. What do you mean, Master? The galaxy expects evolution to follow patterns: bigger ships, stronger weapons, more advanced technology. But humans evolve differently. They become more resourceful, more adaptable, more willing to try solutions that others would never consider. When the test comes, those qualities will matter more than all the advanced technology in the galaxy. Saindel looked uncertain. Are you sure about the prophecy, Master? The humans seem so ordinary. Vorthek turned to look out at the stars, where somewhere among the countless lights, humanity continued its quiet preparation for a future none of them could imagine. That is exactly what makes them extraordinary, he said. The first warning came from the edge of the galaxy, where the outer rim colonies went silent one by one like candles being blown out by an invisible wind. Admiral Susan Wright sat in the command center of Earth Defense Fleet headquarters, watching the communication board as red lights replaced green ones with terrifying speed. Ma'am, we've lost contact with the Dominion Fortress at Zarian Prime, reported Communications Officer Jake Stevens. That's the 7th major installation to go dark in the past 6 hours. Susan leaned forward in her chair, studying the tactical display. The pattern was clear and horrifying. Something was moving through the galaxy's outer territories, and it was unstoppable. Any distress signals? Evacuation reports? Nothing coherent, ma'am. Just scattered fragments before the signals. Cut out completely. But we did pick up this transmission from the Hegemony fleet at Proxima Station. The recording crackled with static and interference, but the terror in the alien commander's voice came through clearly. They're too big, the voice said in broken Galactic Standard. Our weapons do nothing. They eat our shields like they're made of paper? By the void, they're eating our ships. They're eating everything. If anyone receives this, run. Just run and don't look back. The transmission ended in a burst of static that made everyone in the command center flinch. Captain Kevin Harris had been on patrol near Proxima Station when the attack began. His destroyer Valiant was small by alien standards, but it was fast and equipped with the latest human sensors. He watched from a safe distance as ships the size of small moons emerged from what looked like tears in space itself. The Void collective vessels were unlike anything in the galactic databases. They seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, creating holes in space that hurt to look at. When they fired, reality itself seemed to bend and twist around their weapons. "Captain, are you seeing this?" asked his weapons officer, Lieutenant Maria Santos. The Hegemony battlecruiser just fired its main cannon directly into one of those things. The beam went right through it like it wasn't even there. Kevin watched in horror as the enemy vessels surrounded the station's defenders. The alien ships, with their gleaming hulls and energy shields, looked like children's toys next to the dark giants that engulfed them. One by one, the defending vessels simply vanished, consumed by darkness that seemed to spread like a living thing. "Get us out of here," Kevin ordered. "Maximum burn back to fleet headquarters and transmit everything we've recorded." The retreat took 3 days, and during that time, Kevin's crew monitored the galaxy-wide communications network as it slowly collapsed. World after world reported the same thing, massive dark ships appearing without warning, consuming everything in their path, then moving on to the next target. Dr. Jennifer Walsh worked around the clock at Earth's Deep Space Monitoring Station, trying to make sense of the fragmentary reports coming in from across the galaxy. The pattern was becoming clear, and it was worse than anyone had imagined. "They're not just attacking military targets," she reported to Admiral Wright via secure channel. "They're consuming entire star systems. The gravitational readings from the Zarian system show that the stars themselves are going out." "That's impossible," Wright replied. "Stars don't just go out. According to our sensors, 3 suns in the Zarian system have simply stopped existing. Not exploded, not collapsed into black holes, they're just gone. Along with every planet, moon, and space station in those systems." The reports kept coming, each one more impossible than the last. The mighty Dominion, whose planet-killing dreadnoughts had conquered half the galaxy, lasted 6 hours against the invaders. The Stellar Alliance, with their perfect military formations and 3,000-year undefeated record, crumbled in a single day on Sanctuary Prime. The Galactic Council's emergency bunker was filled with the most powerful beings in the galaxy, and they were all terrified. Chancellor Morden of the Supremacy paced back and forth, his usual calm shattered by reports of his home fleet's destruction. "We need to use the Starforge," he declared. "It's our only chance. We can turn entire suns into weapons." Council President Zixandra's tentacles writhed with agitation. "The Starforge takes months to prepare. We don't have months. At their current rate of advance, they'll reach the core worlds in weeks. Then what do you suggest?" demanded Fleet Commander Zektar. "Our combined fleets have thrown everything we have at these creatures. Antimatter bombs, reality disruptors, quantum singularity cannons, nothing even slows them down." That was when Admiral Peter Clark of Earth's Defense Fleet made a suggestion that stunned the assembled leaders into silence. "Maybe the problem is that we're trying to fight them like civilized beings?" The alien leaders stared at him. Clark was one of the newest members of the Council's Military Advisory Board, representing a species that most of them still considered primitive. "What do you mean?" asked Supreme General Viknos of the combined forces. "Every engagement report says the same thing," Clark continued. "We form up in standard battle formations, we attack with maximum firepower, we try to overwhelm them with superior technology. It's not working because we're fighting their war, not ours." "There's only one way to fight a war," Zektar said coldly. "With honor, discipline, and proper strategy." Clark shook his head. "That's only true if your enemy follows the same rules. These things clearly don't. Maybe it's time we stopped following them too." "You're suggesting we abandon military doctrine?" Chancellor Morden asked in disbelief. "I'm suggesting we try tactics that they can't predict or counter. Hit-and-run attacks, guerrilla warfare, asymmetric response. Make them fight our kind of war instead of theirs." The silence that followed was filled with the kind of horror that civilized beings felt when confronted with truly barbaric concepts. "Your species may be comfortable with such Primitive methods, Supreme Admiral Krelanos said carefully. But the rest of us wage war according to established principles that have guided galactic conflict for millions of years. And how's that working out for you? Clark asked quietly. Elder Vorthak, who had been silent throughout the emergency session, finally spoke. His starlight form seemed dimmer than usual, as if the weight of vindication brought no joy. The Admiral is correct. The Void Collective cannot be defeated by conventional means because they are not a conventional enemy. You warned us about the humans, President Zixandra said. You said they would bring darkness to the galaxy. Is this what you saw? No, Vorthak replied, his voice filled with ancient sadness. This is the darkness I saw coming to the galaxy. What I couldn't determine was whether the humans would be its source or its solution. As if summoned by their words, a new report arrived from the front lines. The Kelter Confederacy, the galaxy's most technologically advanced civilization, had fallen in 18 hours. Their quantum defense grids, their probability calculators, their AI-controlled battle networks, none of it had mattered. The refugee ships were already streaming toward the core worlds, carrying stories of horror that defied belief. Entire species consumed not just physically but mentally, their knowledge and memories absorbed into the growing collective consciousness that drove the invasion. Admiral Clark stood up, looking around the room at the assembled leaders of galactic civilization. You can keep trying to fight this war the way you've always fought wars, and you can keep losing. Or you can let humanity show you a different way. What different way? Asked General Morkel of the Hegemony Defense Forces. The way we've always fought, Clark said simply. Like our lives depend on it, like there are no rules except survival. Like every option is on the table, and every advantage is worth taking. Fleet? Commander Zektar's expression showed his disgust. That's not warfare, that's savagery. Call it whatever you want, Clark replied. But it's kept humanity alive for 100,000 years on a world that was trying to kill us every day. And right now, staying alive is all that matters. Outside. The bunker, the stars themselves seemed to flicker as more systems went dark. The galaxy's carefully ordered civilization was crumbling, and with it, all the assumptions about how war should be fought in the distance, barely visible through the bunker's viewing ports. The first Void Collective scouts appeared at the edge of the sanctuary system. They moved slowly, deliberately, like predators that knew their prey had nowhere left to run. Elder Vorthak watched them approach, and felt the weight of prophecies settling on his shoulders like a shroud. The darkness he had foreseen was here at last. Now they would discover whether the humans could become what the galaxy needed them to be, or whether his visions had shown him the end of all things. The time for warnings was over. The time for choice had begun. The great trade routes that had connected civilizations for millions of years fell silent like instruments in a dying orchestra. Captain Alex Turner stood on the bridge of his converted freighter Defiance, looking out at what had once been the bustling Meridian Gate system. Now it was a graveyard of twisted metal and dark energy that seemed to eat the light from nearby stars. Captain, we're picking up survivors in Sector 7, reported his communications officer, Ensign Rachel Kim. Mixed fleet, mostly civilian ships, Alex nodded grimly. The past 3 weeks had been a nightmare of constant retreat, picking up refugees and trying to stay ahead of the advancing Void Collective. His ship carried representatives from 12 different species, all fleeing the same unstoppable darkness. Take us to them, and signal all ships in the area. We're forming up for Meridian Defense Formation 7. His alien crew members looked confused. Commander Velteran of the Hegemony Navy, serving as his tactical officer, raised his scaled head from the sensor display. Captain, there is no Meridian Defense Formation 7 in any of our military databases. That's because I just made it up, Alex replied. And that's exactly why it might work. The mixed fleet that assembled at Meridian Gate was unlike anything in military history. Human destroyers flew alongside Dominion battlecruisers, while Hegemony traders had been hastily armed with whatever weapons could be mounted on their hulls. Command ships from half a dozen species tried to coordinate movements, Using translation programs that couldn't handle the rapid shifts in tactics Alex was proposing, Supreme Admiral Krelanos of the Dominion Fleet opened a channel to Alex's ship, his forearms gesturing in obvious frustration. "Captain Turner, your proposed battle plan makes no sense. You have our fastest ships in the rear, our heaviest ships scattered throughout the formation, and our command vessels mixed in with civilian transports." "That's right," Alex confirmed. "Standard formation would put our heaviest hitters up front, our fastest ships on the flanks, and our command ships safely in the rear. The Void Collective has faced that formation 100 times now. They know exactly how to counter it." "But your formation has no tactical coherence," protested Fleet. "Admiral Zixtel of the Stellar Alliance, our ships will be unable to provide mutual support. Our command structure will be compromised, and our firepower will be completely dispersed." "Good," Alex said. "That means the enemy can't predict what we're going to do either." The Void Collective arrived 6 hours later, their dark ships emerging from the twisted space that they traveled through. Alex watched the sensor readings with growing dread. There were more of them than ever before, and they seemed to have grown larger by consuming the fleets they had defeated. "All ships, this is Turner," he broadcast on the fleet frequency. "Remember, we're not trying to win a glorious battle here. We're trying to survive long enough to hurt them and get our people out. Follow my lead and do not, under any circumstances, do what they expect." The battle began exactly as every previous engagement had. The Void Collective formed their standard consumption pattern, surrounding the defending fleet and moving in for the systematic destruction they had perfected. But this time, instead of meeting them head-on, the mixed fleet scattered like birds before a storm. "Captain, the alien commanders are demanding orders," reported his tactical officer. "They want to know what formation to take." "Tell them to take whatever formation keeps them alive longest," Alex replied. "And tell them to ignore everything they learned in military academy." Admiral Krelanos, commanding the Dominion contingent, found himself following the erratic movements of a human patrol boat that seemed to have no idea what it was doing. The small ship darted between enemy vessels, fired random bursts at their hulls, then fled before return fire could lock onto them. "This is madness," he muttered to his bridge crew. "There's no pattern, no strategy, no purpose to any of this." But as the battle continued, something strange began to happen. The Void Collective ships, which had adapted perfectly to counter every known military tactic, began to show signs of confusion. Their formation wavered as they tried to respond to attacks that came from unexpected directions and ended before defensive measures could be implemented. The human ships were the worst offenders in terms of military discipline, but they were also the most effective. They attacked when they should have retreated, retreated when they should have attacked, and seemed to change their minds about strategy every few minutes. Dr. Helen Martinez, working frantically in her mobile laboratory aboard the research vessel Discovery, made a breakthrough that would change everything. She had been studying captured Void Collective technology for weeks, trying to understand how their collective consciousness operated. "Captain Turner, I need to speak with you immediately," she transmitted from her lab. "I've found something important about how they think." Alex transferred command to his second and made his way to Dr. Martinez's lab through corridors packed with refugees from a dozen worlds. The research vessel had been hastily converted to carry both scientists and civilians, creating a chaotic environment that somehow seemed appropriate for their current situation. "Doctor, what have you found?" Helen pulled up a holographic display showing brainwave patterns. "The Void Collective operates through a shared consciousness that can predict and counter any strategy based on logical military thinking. But look at this. These are human brain patterns during combat stress." The display showed wildly fluctuating neural activity that seemed to follow no recognizable pattern. "Our brains produce what I'm calling chaotic neural resonance when we're under extreme pressure," Helen continued. "It's completely unpredictable, even to us, and it seems to interfere with their collective decision-making process." "You're saying our panic makes us harder to predict?" "Not panic, adaptability. When humans are pushed to their limits, we stop following logical patterns and start improvising in ways that even we don't understand until after we do them. It's driving their collective consciousness crazy because they can't model our behavior. Meanwhile, on Earth, President Mike Johnson was making decisions that horrified the galactic community. Instead of evacuating the planet as other worlds had done, he was implementing what General Linda Foster called total species war. Mr. President, the Galactic Council is formally requesting that Earth begin immediate evacuation procedures, reported his aide, Secretary of State Carol Brooks. They believe our planet cannot be defended. Tell the Council that humanity appreciates their concern, Johnson replied, but we're not going anywhere. General Foster entered the Oval Office with reports from around the globe. Sir, the conversion of civilian infrastructure is proceeding ahead of schedule. Detroit is now producing military equipment at rates that our allies are calling impossible. The entire automotive industry has been retooled for ship construction. What about the other continents? Asia is focusing on electronics and sensor systems. Europe is handling logistics and supply coordination. South America is producing raw materials and basic equipment. Africa is training pilots and crew members faster than we ever thought possible. The president looked out the window at the city that was transforming itself before his eyes. Construction crews worked around the clock, converting office buildings into command centers and shopping malls into equipment depots. It was chaos by any normal standard, but it was organized chaos with a purpose on the distant Seraphim homeworld. Elder Vorthek received a visitor that he had been expecting for centuries. Prophet Sandal approached his master's meditation chamber with urgent news from the communication networks. Master, the Galactic Council has requested our assistance. They want to know if there's any way to defeat the Void Collective using traditional methods. Vorthek's starlight form flickered with what might have been amusement. There is no traditional method that will work against this enemy. That is why the prophecy spoke of humans. But, Master, surely there must be something. Ancient weapons? Forgotten technologies, some power that the elder races have kept in reserve? Young one, you still do not understand. The humans are not strong because of their technology or their weapons. They are strong because they refuse to accept that anything is impossible. When every other species reaches the limits of what they believe can be done, humans simply ignore those limits and keep going. Sandal looked out at the stars where flashes of light marked the distant battle at Meridian Gate. Are you certain they can succeed where all others have failed? I am certain of nothing except what I have seen in the sacred flames, Vorthek replied. The humans will either save us all or doom us all. There appears to be no middle ground where their species is concerned. Back at Meridian Gate, the impossible was beginning to happen. The Void Collective, facing an enemy that refused to fight according to any recognizable pattern, was actually retreating. Not defeated, but confused and frustrated by opponents who seemed to change their entire tactical approach every few minutes. Captain Turner watched the dark ships pull back toward the system's edge and felt a moment of hope that he hadn't experienced in weeks. They had bought time, perhaps even learned something that could be used in future battles. All ships, this is Turner. He broadcast to the mixed fleet. The Sol system had become something that no alien database could have predicted or cataloged. Admiral Tony Rodriguez stood in the command center orbiting Earth, looking out at a sight that defied every principle of military science he had ever learned. The space around humanity's homeworld was filled with ships, but they looked nothing like the sleek vessels that other species built. Ma'am, the final defensive preparations are complete, reported his aide, Lieutenant Colonel Sarah. Mitchell, every human settlement from Mercury to the Kuiper Belt is now armed and ready. Rodriguez nodded, studying the tactical displays that showed Earth's transformation. The planet below was no longer just a world, it was a weapon. Every city had been converted into a fortress, every civilian had been trained for combat, every piece of technology had been adapted for war. Captain Mary Johnson commanded one of the new human vessels that emerged from Earth's hastily expanded shipyards. Her ship looked crude compared to alien designs. Angular, functional, built for survival rather than elegance. But it had something that alien ships lacked. It could be repaired, modified, and rebuilt using nothing but basic tools and determination. "Captain, we're receiving reports from the outer sensor grid," announced her tactical officer, Commander Lisa Shun. "The Void Collective main force is approaching the system's edge. Estimated arrival in 6 hours." Mary looked around her bridge. Crew, seeing faces that represented the entire human species. Engineers from Detroit, farmers from Kansas, students from universities around the world, all united by the simple fact that this was their home and they would not give it up without a fight. "Signal all ships," she ordered. "Implement the Morrison Protocol." The Morrison Protocol was humanity's answer to military doctrine. There wasn't one. Every ship, every station, every armed platform was given the same simple instruction: do whatever keeps you alive and hurts the enemy. No formations, no coordinated strategies, no predictable patterns. Dr. Chris Brown, working in his laboratory beneath the Rocky Mountains, put the finishing touches on humanity's secret weapon. It wasn't a supergun or a reality-bending device. It was information. "General Foster, the analysis is complete," he reported to his superior. "We've identified 17 critical weaknesses in Void Collective technology, but exploiting them requires tactics that no civilized species would ever consider." General Linda Foster looked at the data with growing amazement. "What kind of tactics?" "Ramming attacks, suicide runs using civilian ships as decoys, fighting while retreating, retreating while attacking, basically everything that military schools teach you never to do." "And this will work?" "It should," Chris replied. "But only if we're willing to fight like barbarians instead of soldiers." The first Void Collective ships entered the Sol system like dark thunderclouds, their massive forms blotting out the stars. Behind them, they moved with the confidence of predators who had never encountered real resistance, expecting to find another helpless civilization waiting to be consumed. Instead, they found Chaos. Commander Gary Lewis defending Luna Cition. Earth's moon implemented the first surprise. When Void forces surrounded the lunar base instead of trying to hold defensive positions, he evacuated through mining tunnels and turned the moon's industrial equipment into improvised weapons. "All stations, this is Lewis," he broadcast. "Converting MASS drivers to artillery mode. Target coordinates are being transmitted now." The Void ships suddenly found themselves under bombardment from weapons that shouldn't have existed. Mining lasers reconfigured for combat or haulers ramming into their hulls. Construction equipment turned into guided missiles. Dr. Rachel Green's research station on Europa contributed the next shock. Her team had discovered that human genetic diversity created a natural resistance to the Void Collective's assimilation process, and they had weaponized that resistance. "Broadcasting neural interference pattern now," she transmitted to all human ships. "This should disrupt their collective consciousness within a 50-kilometer radius." The effect was immediate and devastating. Void ships that had moved with perfect coordination suddenly began colliding with each other as their shared mind fractured under the chaotic influence of human thought patterns. But the real surprise came when the Void Collective reached Earth itself and discovered that they weren't attacking a planet. They were attacking an entire species that had turned itself into a weapon. General Sandra Martinez coordinated Operation Chaos Storm from her bunker beneath the Pentagon, watching as simultaneous attacks erupted across 17 different sectors. Human ships appeared from asteroid fields, gas giant atmospheres, and the corona of the sun itself, striking at targets that alien tactical computers insisted should have been impossible to reach. "Ma'am, the enemy is requesting communication," reported her communications officer. Sandra almost laughed. "They want to talk? Put them through." The voice that emerged from the speakers was unlike anything they had heard before, a collective consciousness speaking with billions of voices in perfect unison. "Human species, your resistance is unprecedented. We offer terms for your integration into our collective." "Counteroffer," Sandra replied. "Leave our galaxy and never come back." "That is not acceptable." Your chaotic nature makes you unsuitable for integration, but your resistance threatens our operational efficiency. We will adapt and overcome. Good luck with that, Sandra said. And cut the connection. The climactic battle took place in Earth's orbital space, where Captain Danny Clark led the final assault on the Void Collective mothership. His vessel, the Indomitable, was a converted cargo hauler that looked like it had been built by children using spare parts. "Captain, we're completely outgunned," reported his weapons officer, Lieutenant Sam Rodriguez. "Their main ship is the size of a small moon." "Then we don't fight their ship," Danny replied. "We fight their mind." The Indomitable dove directly into the enemy formation, broadcasting Dr. Green's neural interference pattern at maximum power while human ships. Throughout the system began the most unorthodox attack in military history. Instead of trying to destroy the massive void vessels, they began ramming them with cargo ships, mining equipment, and anything else that could be launched at high speed. Instead of engaging in ship-to-ship combat, they landed boarding parties that included civilians armed with improvised weapons. The Void Collective, designed to face military forces, found itself fighting janitors with crowbars, students with jury-rigged explosives, and engineers who treated their capital ships like broken appliances that needed fixing. "All human vessels, this is Clark," Danny broadcast as his ship tore through the mothership's hull using nothing but momentum and stubbornness. "Remember what makes us dangerous. We don't just fight to win. We fight to survive. And we're really, really good at surviving." The turning point came when Dr. Patricia White, a xenobiologist working on the captured mothership's bridge, made a discovery that changed everything. The Void Collective wasn't truly collective at all. It was a single massive consciousness that had absorbed billions of other minds. "It's in pain," she transmitted to the human fleet. "The collective consciousness is suffering because it can't process our chaotic thought patterns. Every time it tries to absorb human neural patterns, it damages itself." Captain Clark looked around the alien bridge that is boarding. Party had captured using nothing but determination and the alien crew's complete inability to predict human behavior. "Then let's give it more than it can handle," he said. The final phase of the battle wasn't fought with weapons at all. Every human in the Sol system began broadcasting their thoughts, their fears, their hopes, their completely unpredictable and illogical emotional responses to the situation they faced. The Void Collective, trying to process the mental chaos of an entire species that refused to think in patterns, began to collapse under the weight of human consciousness. Elder Vorthok, watching from his distant monastery, felt the moment when the tide of cosmic fate shifted. The darkness that had consumed half the galaxy suddenly stopped advancing, not because it had been defeated, but because it had encountered something it could not understand or absorb. The Void Collective retreated, their ships fleeing toward the galactic rim in disorder that no one had thought possible. Behind them, they left a changed galaxy where the rules of war and survival had been rewritten by a species that refused to accept that anything was impossible. Ambassador Julie Thompson addressed the reformed Galactic Council from the rebuilt chambers on New Zephyr, representing a humanity that was no longer the junior member seeking acceptance. "The prophets were right about one thing," she told the assembled delegates. "We humans are different. We don't just adapt to survive. We adapt to thrive. We don't follow the patterns that govern everyone else because we make our own patterns as we go." She looked around the chamber at alien faces that now showed respect instead of dismissal. "The galaxy has learned something important about humanity. Today, when you push us to our limits, we don't break. We become something you never expected. And now that the Void Collective is gone, we can teach the rest of you what it really means to be alive in an uncertain universe." The vote to grant humanity full membership in the Galactic Council was unanimous, but more importantly,